We also have freedom of speech. We just don't have freedom after speech. All right, so I wanted to have a conversation, this time a longer conversation, because I feel that the topic requires a bit of going into depth. The topic is freedom of speech and capitalism and how one affects the other. I feel that in the United States, and I think when we corresponded back and forth over the years, you've admitted that although you're a critic of the United States, you do believe that the United States has among the strongest, if not the strongest, protections for speech of any country on earth. Do you still hold by that?
Yeah, that's been true since the 1960s. Before that, it wasn't true. The First Amendment, contrary to what people believe, doesn't really guarantee freedom of speech. It prevents prior restraint. But if the government doesn't like what you say, they can throw you into jail under the First Amendment. If you read it, it says nothing. It says there shall be no prior restraint on speech, but it doesn't say there should be no punishment for speech. And in fact, that didn't even come to the courts until the 20th century. There was no freedom of speech issues. I mean, there were issues, but they didn't reach the Supreme Court. And the first pretty mild supports for freedom of speech were in dissents by Holmes and Brandeis, and they were pretty weak dissents. So the first major one was in the Schenck case. Schenck was, during the First World War, had published some private pamphlets questioning whether the US should go into the war. So he was brought to trial, and the court went to Supreme Court, which validated the judgment against him. And Holmes wrote a dissent, but a very mild one. He actually approved of the judgment, but he said you should have some constraints on when these laws are applied. So it's a very weak dissent. And actually, it wasn't until the 1960s that there were strong decisions by the Supreme Court. The first one was Times v. Sullivan in 1964, which was in the context of the civil rights movement. The state of Alabama had sued the New York Times because it had a statement, I think, by Martin Luther King, sharply criticizing one of the racist sheriffs in Alabama. And Alabama brought a libel suit on the grounds that state officials have immunity from criticism. That's called sovereign immunity, which holds in most countries. In England, for example, you can be condemned for
libel or slander.
The Queen or the Anglican religion. Condemn the Anglican religion, you can be brought to court. That's sovereign immunity. Well, that was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1964, which was one step forward. And the next step forward, interestingly, was in a case involving the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan, some inflammatory speeches by the Klan were condemned, And it got to the Supreme Court, which threw it out and established a very strong doctrine, which I think is the right one. It said speech should be free up to participation in imminent criminal action. So, for example, if you and I go into a store and I have a gun and I say shoot, that's not acceptable speech.
But if you told somebody to play a Justin Bieber song, that would be okay.
That would be okay. They don't really adhere to this, but I think it's a good standard. And it's way beyond what any other country has that I know.
So the freedom of speech, I mean, that's an interesting take. You know, the 13th Amendment is known for sort of incorporating the Bill of Rights against cities and states, meaning the Bill of Rights was originally supposed to be a check on the federal government. Not, you know, cities and states could perhaps even compel speech, not just restrict speech. But it's interesting that you're saying this because in Russia, they used to say, or USSR, some people used to joke that we also have freedom of speech. We just don't have freedom after speech. So
That's
that,
the First Amendment.
that's what you're saying was.
No freedom after speech.
So then what was it that was incorporated against the states in the 13th Amendment when the Bill of Rights started to be applied to states and cities?
Same as the First Amendment. This was all kind of hazy because it really never came to the high court until the 20th century. It just wasn't much of an issue.
But basically, when Congress shall make no law abridging speech or religion, by which method then was it actually abridged? By which method was it,
It just says Congress shall make no law preventing speech.
preventing speech?
But it doesn't say that the government can't go after you and accuse you because they didn't like your speech.